greetings to everybody. Uh, I am about to do what we call a karakia in New Zealand. It's a traditional Māori cultural protocol that provides an introduction to a starter meeting and provides a safe way for everyone to contribute. Whakamana here, tēnei wā, tēnei whakaaro, tēnei kaupapa, whakarongo ake ki te tangi o te ao wairua. E karanga mai ana ngā manu kua ngaro. I te moa, i te huia, i te hoki oi, i ngā manu katoa o te nihi. Haere mai ki te taha o wairua, kaua ki te ao kiokio. Kia mau tō koutou tapu, kia tau tō koutou rangi Māori. Noa te tangata e a whakaarahia anō te mea kua tau ki te whenua. Kaua te hanga hau e raweke i te Māori o te ao. He mea tape te mate, he mea ora te mau mahara. E hini nui i te poa, tia kina ngā wairua, kua hoki kia koe. E tāne, tia kina te wao, te manu, me te hau ore o te ao. Kia tau te aroha, kia mau, te tika, kia u te rangi Māori, haumia, huia, taiki. Thanks, Claire. I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you. Kia ora, ko Claire Adams tōko ingoa. Hi, my name is Claire Adams. Just saying that this session reflects the kaupapa of Genomics for Aotearoa New Zealand, or GFANZ. We are a member-supported charity. To learn more about us and support our work, please visit our website at genomics.nz. This community is accessible as well via the Te Ara Parangi community, and we can drop some links into the chat. Just letting everyone know, to make this session more accessible, we will be recording the session for reuse, and please, if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Nick Rawlence. He is a leading New Zealand science communicator and director of the Otago Palaeogenomics Lab. After gaining his PhD at the University of Adelaide in 2011, he moved to the University of Waikato before settling in Dunedin in 2013. Nick's research focuses on reconstructing prehistoric ecosystems, whether they are hundreds of years or tens of millions of years old, how these ecosystems have responded to Aotearoa New Zealand dynamic geological, climatic, and human history, and how we can use this information to inform evidence-based kaitiakitanga and conservation management. Nick, would you like to give us your talk?
Thanks, and thank you for the wonderful karakia and introduction. I'll just share the screen. Now, can everyone see the slides?
If you do the swap displays.
Yep. I continue to share. Might be, let's stop share. I'll do it this way. Desktop 2. Right. Does that work?
Perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. So, I'm going to talk to you guys about myth-busting de-extinction to sort fact from fiction. So we live in an age of extinction with the current sixth mass extinction event, which has been ongoing really for about the past 50,000 years with the movement of humans, anatomically modern humans around the world. And extinction has been a part of Earth's geological history. We've got the Great Dying with the late Devonian extinction nearly 400 million years ago, and then we've got the KT extinction event, which led to the extinction of all the marine reptiles and most of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. And in New Zealand, extinction is also a part of our biological history in New Zealand with the arrival of East Polynesians around 1250, 1280 AD, that through overhunting, so whether more than the actual populations of animals could withstand, or whether it was wasteful. There are umu, which are Maori ovens from archaeological sites down in the Catlins just south of me that have complete articulated moa legs in situ. But also through burning of the landscape and introduction of predators like Kuri the Polynesian dog and Kiora the Pacific rat led to a whole suite of extinctions. And then with European arrival in the late 1700s and them bringing all of their furry horde of predators led to even more extinctions. And so in New Zealand, we've actually lost about 80 species of birds and counting, with ancient DNA and morphometric research actually discovering more and more extinct species. So you can kind of see why there's this fascination with de-extinction and with people wanting to undo, say, the sins of the past. But we really need to go back to this movie. So if I asked you how many of you was your first introduction to de-extinction and ancient DNA, Jurassic Park, a lot of hands would go up. Now we can't bring, and I can see thumbs up going up on my screen at the moment. Now, we can't bring dinosaurs back, let them run amok and eat lawyers like in the movie, but we can do a lot of really cool stuff with ancient DNA. But we really need to think about, is Jurassic Park a tale of de-extinction, or is it a tale of genetic engineering? And so in the movie, you'll remember the scientists sequenced all the ancient DNA of these dinosaurs. They plugged all the gaps with frog DNA. And then through subsequent movies, they start doing a whole lot of genetic engineering. And so really we can look at Jurassic Park and de-extinction as it's pretty much busted. But this is really how it comes down to how Colossal, which is this, it's not the only de-extinction company, but it's one of the biggest, is actually selling de-extinction. They are working off the public perception of de-extinction being around Jurassic Park. So Colossal was set up in 2021 by Ben Lamb, the guy in the leather jacket, who is a billionaire tech entrepreneur, and he teamed up with George Church, who is a Harvard geneticist. He's in the corduroy or tweed jacket, who was trying to de-extinct the woolly mammoth. And read that as genetically engineer an Asian elephant to be hairy and cold tolerant. Now, Colossal's got a value of over 10 billion US dollars, but it's very much a speculative value. It's based on them being able to deliver what they're actually promising to deliver. There are other de-extinction companies. There's Revive and Restore, which is looking at the passenger pigeon, and interestingly, they don't like Colossal, but there are other companies in China and in Japan, and we get contacted every month by de-extinction companies around the world wanting access to New Zealand's taonga or treasured extinct animals. And so Colossal have these de-extinction candidates. As I said, they've got the woolly mammoth, where they would like to release them into the Siberian tundra. They've got the dodo that was publicly announced with new advances, which I'll talk about in a minute. The thylacine with Andy Pask, who's at the University of Melbourne, that's just teamed up with Colossal. And they announced the direwolf in April of this year. And it was so secret, the direwolf, that the actual academics and scientists at universities around the world that were collaborating with Colossal to sequence the two direwolf genomes, look at their evolution, look at their genes, didn't even know they'd actually gone and de-extincted the direwolf. And so in July, Colossal public announced in a really big splashy video that had a whole lot of very racist aspects to it. They teamed up with Paul Schofield from Canterbury Museum, Kyle Davis, who is a Ngāi Tahu archaeologist, and the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre at the University of Canterbury. And they described their project as empowering and inspiring and revolutionary. And Paul Schofield, Colossal's advisor, I'll read these quotes out because I can never remember them, said Colossal are providing New Zealand conservationists with an unprecedented opportunity to create a lost species. Ben Lamb, the CEO, said within a decade, a moa hatchling would be a reality, and Schofield was 100% positive this will happen, and it will look exactly like a moa, actually having the real thing out there in the forest. Now, the pushback on this from critics like myself, but others, has been really damning. So Professor Phil Seddon, who's an internationally renowned conservationist, said the end result will not and cannot be a moa, a unique treasure created through millennia of adaptation and change. While Professor Tammy Steeves, who's an expert on the genomics of New Zealand bird species, said, if it sounds too good to be true, it likely is. And so this spawned a whole lot of worldwide pushback. So how do you actually de-extinct an animal? Now, the only way, I would argue, that you can actually de-extinct an animal, a true de-extinction, create an identical copy of a species that is long lost, is through cloning. So one of these hairy creatures is cloned and one is not. So this is Dolly the sheep. It's the first cloned mammal next to, I suppose, her creator. And the way cloning works is you take a donor cell from a sheep and you extract its nucleus. So that's the part of the cell that contains the genome, the complete genetic blueprint of an individual. And you get an egg cell from another sheep and you remove its nucleus or its genetic blueprint and create what you call an enucleated cell. Now you put this cell and the nucleus next to each other, give them an electric shock, and they will fuse and start to develop an embryo. And you implant this embryo in a surrogate, and 9 months later you get Dolly the sheep is born. Now this will take hundreds and hundreds of goes to get one Dolly the sheep. And your clone will be the age of the individual you took the cell from. So if you're cloning a 40-year-old sheep, your baby Dolly will be 40 years old. Think of like the curious case of Benjamin Button. Now there's only been one extinct creature that has been de-extincted this way. It was an ibex. It had died about 3 years prior, and scientists took well-preserved tissue sample from liquid nitrogen. They cloned it, but again, this individual died within hours due to multiple organ failure. So extinction is still forever. You can't de-extinct anything. So I could stop talking now, but I won't. So what is Colossal doing? So the reason we can't actually do de-extinction, true de-extinction, is to do cloning, you need high quality DNA. So if you've done that experiment in high school or university where you take broccoli or a strawberry or a banana and you blend it all up, you mix it with ice cold ethanol, add some detergent, and then you get these long skewers and you fish out these long strings of snotty looking material. That's your really high quality DNA. It stretches of tens or hundreds of millions of individual DNA letters, A's, G's, C's, and T's, your genetic code long. It's like this page out of Alice in Wonderland, the rabbit hole, which is fairly apt. We can photocopy that page. We could, if it was DNA, we could amplify it through polymerase chain reaction. We can work with it, and you need that really high quality DNA for cloning. Now, if we take that rabbit hole page and we put it in a wood-fired pizza oven for 500 degrees overnight, we're going to bring it out and it's going to be crumbs, shard, fragments. It's going to start looking like fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we can sequence all of those individual fragments and you can reconstruct a genome sequence, your A's, G's, C's, and T's, but you cannot reconstruct those long stretches of high quality DNA. So what does Colossal and de-extinction companies want to do? So they want to sequence all of these short pieces of DNA. And what you need is a scaffold or a reference genome. So this is a reconstruction of North America 13,000 years ago, where you've got grey wolves here looking quite grey, kind of looking like a Australian cattle dog or a blue heeler. And then these ones here with the orange tan coloured fur, that's your direwolf. And that's what we think a direwolf coat looks like based on its evolutionary relationships with coyote, and it looks similar to those in a dingo. So scientists will take all these short fragments of DNA, they will align them against a reference genome. In this case, it's a grey wolf genome, and reconstruct that genome sequence. And then they'll start looking at what are all the differences between a direwolf and a grey wolf. And these could be genes that code or mutations that code for pale coat color. And interestingly, Colossal didn't actually talk about this gene at all in the preprint of their direwolf evolution paper. It could be genes for baculum or penis bone size around territoriality. It could be genes for body proportions, coat length, coat thickness, bone size. Now, the next step, and I'm using here the analogy of woolly mammoths and Asian elephants, is you've sequenced your ancient genome, you've compared it to a modern close relative, is scientists will create synthetic copies of the genes or the specific mutations that you find in your extinct animal, like a direwolf or a woolly mammoth, and they will insert those into high quality genomes, your long, nice stretches of DNA from, say, an Asian elephant or a grey wolf, to create a genetically modified genome. So they're not creating an extinct creature, they're creating a designer genetically modified grey wolf or a designer Asian elephant. Now you can take that high quality genetically engineered genome, you can put it in an enucleated cell, just like what occurred with Dolly, give it a zap and it'll start developing into an embryo. Now, that works with mammals and to a certain point marsupials. Birds are a bit of a conundrum. You can't use classical cloning to clone birds because your bird embryo starts developing before the actual eggshell starts developing around the egg. And so scientists had developed the system in chickens and in geese, and Colossal have just done it with pigeons as a way to get towards genetically engineering a Nicobar pigeon to look like its close relative, the extinct dodo. So in birds, you have these cells called primordial germ cells. They're the precursors to sperm and egg. And if you can take one of these genetically modified genomes and put them into these primordial germ cells, you can then get sperm and egg developed, and then you can do fertilization. Now, what Colossal have just developed is genetically modified chickens that do not produce their own sperm and egg. And so the idea, what they want to do is take these primordial germ cells with genetically engineered Nicobar pigeon genomes, put them into chicken embryos. Those cells will migrate to where the sperm and egg are produced. Your chickens will hatch, and they will be genetically chickens, but they will produce the sperm and egg containing the DNA of genetically engineered Nicobar pigeons. They'll have sex, and you will get chickens laying eggs containing gene modified pigeons. And so that's how Colossal want to create genetically engineered birds. Now, the question is, how do you do this genetic engineering? And so there's the discovery that won its discoverers the Nobel Prize, and we're looking at CRISPR-Cas9. Think of it as an enzyme that acts like a pair of scissors, and you can go in very precisely and say, in a target gene, cut it in half, delete part of it, and you can insert, say, synthetic pieces of DNA matching your extinct creature. And this is what Colossal did with the direwolf. They did 20 edits to 14 genes. Now, some of these edits will have, excuse the pun, dire consequences. Colossal tried to edit the gene for pale coat color. It didn't work, so they went and genetically engineered 3 other genes. And the current technology at the moment is Colossal are producing about 500 edits simultaneously using the CRISPR-Cas9 system at the moment. But as I'll talk about, we're looking at needing millions of edits, tens of millions of edits. And so doing 20 edits to 14 genes of a grey wolf does not make it a direwolf. So you've got your embryo. You need a surrogate. With the direwolf, these embryos were implanted into domestic dog surrogates that brought the pups to term and then had C-sections. Now, there's going to be hundreds of individual failures. Colossal hasn't come clean on how many failures there were, like there were with Dolly, or the ibex took hundreds of goes to get one ibex and one Dolly. But you're not going to be able to put, say, a genetically engineered Asian elephant that's going to start looking like a mammoth and with body proportions and everything into, say, an Asian elephant surrogate. Or you can't put animal resembling a thylacine into a fat-tailed dunner. They're going to have to create these artificial wombs, and sometimes it's just size is the issue. A dunnart is really small, a thylacine is not. It could be gestation times. Mammoths have a longer gestation time than Asian elephants, or it could be your surrogate's really endangered like an Asian elephant. With birds, like with the moa, this is the egg of the South Island giant moa colossal wants to de-extinct. There is no living bird in the world with an egg that size. This is an emu egg in comparison. So they're going to have to create artificial egg technology that hasn't been produced. So assuming you actually get through all those hurdles, you get these designer animals born. So this is Romulus and Remus. Khaleesi is not on this picture, but they are lying on the Iron Throne. So this is the Iron Throne from the Game of Thrones TV series that Peter Jackson, who has signed up with Colossal to de-extinct the moa, owns, and he lent for this prop. Now, I said Colossal modifying the gene for pale coat color didn't work, and so they modified 3 other genes. This is not what we think the coat color of direwolves was actually like. This actually matches what people think direwolves look like based on pop culture and the TV series Game of Thrones. They're white. Now, this isn't surprising when George R.R. Martin, who wrote the book series Game of Thrones, is actually cultural advisor and has donated money to Colossal. So it's very much people's pet projects and designing animals, very much like InGen out of Jurassic Park. So Colossal can't argue that these are de-extincted. So they're saying we've got functional de-extinction. And what they would like to say is if this looks like the animal, if it's going to miraculously fill the ecological niche or job vacancy in the ecosystem of this animal, and then it will fix the ecosystem. So it's that common phrase, if it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. What I would actually say, it's actually more likely to be a gene-modified flounder. And so just because you look like an extinct animal, or people think an extinct animal should look like, does not make you an extinct animal. And this is where Colossal's science communication comes in, is they're almost trying to sell the lie. It's like Donald Trump trying to say that the 2020 election was rigged, and if he says it enough, people will believe it. Ben Lamb has said about the dodo that if it's got the ancient genes of a dodo, if it lives where the dodo lives, if it fills the role of a dodo, then people are going to think it's a dodo, therefore it's a dodo. And that's really undermining people's trust in science and scientific discourse. So what are the benefits of de-extinction? Colossal has said it's all about conservation, and I find that very hard to believe. So Colossal has said that when they recreate the moa, they're going to go in effectively a moa park for an ecotourism opportunity, and that doesn't sound like conservation to me. Theoretically, if you introduced mammoth into the Siberian tundra, they would stamp and trample on the ground. They would turn it back into the really productive mammoth steppe. They would help sequester carbon and combat climate change. But you're going to need thousands and thousands of mammoths to do that, and it's going to create human-mammoth conflict. And if you've ever read Jasper Ford's Thursday Next series, they actually de-extincted mammoths in that series, and they have the mammoth forecast of where all the migrating mammoth herds are going to go and how you should protect your gardens from being trampled and destroyed. In New Zealand, the New Zealand forest hasn't actually realized moa have gone extinct 500 years ago. There is still a whole lot of lost ecological connections that relied on moa. So whether that's moa dispersing these brightly colored truffle-like fungi that they're ectomycorrhizal, they form a symbiotic relationship with forest trees that help forests contract and expand across the landscape with cold glacial, warm interglacial cycles, or anti-moa browsing defenses like divarication. Here, the angles of branches are important. What we call heteroblasty. This is the lancewood in New Zealand, where the juvenile looks really, really dead, long serrated leaves, really quite spiky. And when it reaches 3 meters in height, which is about the height a giant moa could reach, it starts turning to this bushy adult tree. Excuse me. But you would need a large number of moa released into the environment. And there's been modeling done that it need to be a sustainable population that would require 3/4 of the South Island to actually sustain them. And that's not doable. So there are technological limits to the what Colossal and other de-extinction companies want to do. So I said Colossal had done 20 edits to 14 genes of a grey wolf to make their supposed direwolf. Now, direwolves and grey wolves share an ancestor about 2 to 6 million years ago. They've got a genome size of about 2.5 billion base pairs, and that's greater than 99.9% identical. But you're still looking at over 1 million individual differences. So 20 edits does not make a direwolf. If you look at thylacines here and the fat-tailed dunner that Andy Pasker's working on, that's tens of millions of years of divergence. And if we go to moa, you've got the extinct moa here of New Zealand. You've got to go back 58 million years to reach its closest living relative. This is the tinamou, small flying chicken-sized birds in South America. And then to get to the common ancestor of a moa and an emu in this whakapapa or this evolutionary tree, you have to go back 65 million years to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Now that's conservatively about 10 million individual letters of genetic code different. And one of the critics, Dr. Hempridge Bennett from the UK, basically said, for context, there's only 42 million years between a humans and a howler monkey to get to the common ancestor. You simply can't make a human with a genetically modified howler monkey. And so it's not just the genes that are important if you're wanting to de-extinct some of these creatures. There's also what we used to call junk DNA. So ratites are a group of birds. They're in Palaeogenetics, the old birds as opposed to neonates, new birds, and they've all independently lost flight. And moa are unique in the bird world and they have absolutely no wings whatsoever. But if you sequence the genomes of all of these ratites and look at their genes for wing formation, they're all functional. You could put these into a chicken embryo model and you get wings developing. It's actually the gene regulators, the promoters and the enhancers upstream that have had these independent mutations evolve. So if you're going to de-extinct these creatures, you've got to get the genes right, you've got to get the promoters and enhancers. The analogy is the planes say to build a car in a factory completely right. You could give those planes to a different car factory or manufacturer and you could build that car. It's the genetic code, or the computer code that tells the robots how to build the car that is corrupted. But we also need to think about structural variants in the genome that we're now only just getting an understanding of, and also how that genome is packaged. So to me, the technology to bring back extinct creatures is very much a tall order, and I don't think it'll be there, and it will never be there. So extinction is still very, very much forever. But there are ecological concerns. So the direwolf habitat disappeared 13,000 years ago when extinct at the end of the last ice age. And Colossal in Den of Geek magazine just the other day has come out and said they actually want to create a self-sustaining pack of direwolves that they want to release back into the wild, like Yellowstone National Park example, with wolves, and so they can live their lives and miraculously fix these ecosystems as if by magic. Now, the giant moa, it's a generalist, so you could probably put it anywhere in New Zealand, including a sheep paddock, and it would eat grass and be happy. But Colossal have said that they want to de-extinct all 9 species of moa, and some had very specific habitat preferences. You've got the upland moa, the mountain goat of the moa world that lived all in the alpine areas. You've got heavy-footed moa, which has been described by famous New Zealand archaeologist Beverly McCulloch as a 40-gallon drum walking on little kids' gumboots. Or for fans of South Park, this is Cartman. You've got other species of moa that lived along this eastern South Island and into central Otago and the southern South Island. Now, the forest that was here at the time of human arrival was this open shrubland, grassland mosaic, very similar to open eucalypt woodland in Australia. There's no analogue of that anywhere in New Zealand. And in central Otago, there was even a stranger analogue where the canopy was kowhai, which is Maori for yellow. It's a tree in New Zealand, bright yellow flowers, and lancewood that I showed you before. And we don't have that anywhere left. And so this is what central Otago looks like today, quite barren. And this lone tree here is a several hundred-year-old kowhai. So you're going to have to, if you're going to bring these poor facsimiles of extinct creatures back, you need to bring back their ecosystem as well. It's like that first Jurassic Park movie where the Triceratops gets sick. You can't bring back the animal without bringing back its ecosystem. And then you shouldn't be surprised that it gets sick eating a plant that didn't exist when it was alive. But I would argue you can't de-extinct animals without de-extincting all their gut microflora. All their parasites, all their bacteria, all the viruses. And so the ability, say, of moa to disperse these bright truffle-like fungi that help forest spread, that could be down to their gut microflora. But you're going to de-extinct a genetically engineered emu and reintroduce it into Moa Park and then expect it to fill the ecological function. We know introduced deer in New Zealand can eat these fungi, but they don't survive passage through the gut. The deer can eat the exotic fungi that then help pest plant species to spread far and wide, like Pinus radiata, Christmas trees are an absolute pest here in New Zealand. And so how much of the ability of moa to spread these fungi or perform these ecological functions is actually due to their gut microflora. There are also more ecological concerns. So Colossal have said that they want to take these artificial giant moa eggs, bring them back into New Zealand, and that's going to be a real issue because we're very strict biosecurity laws, and genetic engineering is actually illegal in New Zealand. And even before you can even get an animal released into Moa Park, it's got to go into quarantine like a zoo. You've then got to apply to have very strict controlled field trials, even before you set a moa free in Moa Park. But they want to hatch these moa on Ngāi tribal land, and they will be raised parentless. Now, all ratites show parental care. The only time we break that rule is in conservation, where you take kiwi eggs into captivity, you hatch them till they get, you grow them till they get 1 year old, they're big enough to fend against predators. Now, supporters of de-extinction would say all of this behavior is completely innate. You just know how to be a thylacine or a moa or a direwolf. But Colossal actually said in the Den of Geek magazine the other day is they're actually going to have to start bringing in wolves from outside the pack, like grey wolves, to teach these direwolves actually how to hunt, how to behave. So these extinct animals need parents to tell them how to behave like a mammoth or a moa. And that can mean they're quite maladapted and require a whole lot of conservation. But they could also be hyper-adapted and become a pest. And so there's a great American journalist who writes for Slate magazine in America, but he's based here in Dunedin with the unfortunate name of Eric Trump, no relation. He said, this moa will be a new creature, not an animal with native roots in New Zealand. This makes it yet another introduced species like the rat or the stoat. They're not reintroducing native animals back to where they were. And so if you have to start culling these genetically engineered animals, especially in New Zealand where extinct animals or living extinct animals are considered taonga or treasured, you're going to have to start having uncomfortable conversations. And Phil Wilcox, who's a Maori genomicist here at Otago, said it remains to be seen if these artificial facsimiles of moa that do not have a whakapapa or genealogical relationship with Maori will be accepted as treasures. So the money for de-extinction doesn't come from the public sector. It comes from private benefactors, the tech industry, from gullible celebrities like Peter Jackson or Tiger Woods or Paris Hilton or Tom Hardy. And so it doesn't take money away from conservation that way, but actually conserving these the extinct animals, if they were brought back and released into the wild, or even in a Moa Park, is going to create opportunity costs, especially if all the costs fall on, say, the Department of Conservation in New Zealand, or if this was the US, it would be the US Parks and Wildlife Service. If it falls on local communities or Indigenous peoples whose kaitiaki or guardianship roles is about looking after the animals on the whenua of the land. And so if, say, a moa was brought back and the conservation fell on New Zealanders and not colossal, you're going to take money away from species that are actually more worthy of being conserved. If colossal in perpetuity looked after all these animals, then you're going to have more money to save species. But if you just didn't de-extinct animals at all and let ghosts lie, you'd actually have even more money to look after animals like the takahe or the kakapo, or the Mauritius pig pigeon or other highly endangered animals that are much worthy of not of de-extinction, but of conservation. But you can't just bring back a few animals, which is what it sounds like. And Colossal of Ben Lam has actually said it costs about $75 million to bring back an extinct animal. As you need to bring back a genetically healthy, sizable population, like all of the listeners, your friends, they all look different to you. You look similar to your siblings, to your parents, but quite different. That's all genetic variation. So we want these populations to have lots of genetic variation. You don't want them to be inbred like the English royal family or Tutankhamun's children whose parents were brother and sister, or this guy, this is the Habsburg dynasty with the famous Habsburg jaw, and then became so inbred they couldn't breed. So in conservation circles, you actually have this 500 rule. You need several hundred individuals that are really, really genetically diverse to prevent inbreeding and inbreeding depression. And a good example of this and the dangers is mammoths that were isolated on Wrangel Island. Up here in Siberia, circled on red. Now, scientists sequenced the genomes of mammoths on the Siberian mainland, and they had high levels of heterozygosity, so it's high levels of genetic variation, and they had low levels of what we call runs of homozygosity. And so this is basically you get one copy of your DNA from your mum, one from your dad, and when you get fertilization, that DNA crosses over and you get recombinations, how you look similar to your siblings but different. And in large populations of lots of random mating, you're going to get lots of recombinations, so small bits of your genome will be identical. So mammoths went extinct on the mainland and they got isolated on Wrangel Island with sea level rise. They went through a massive bottleneck down to about 10 individuals, and they recovered to several hundred and had a stable population size. So in conservation, that would be everything's hunky-dory, everything's fine, you're recovered. But that Wrangel Island population had low levels of genetic variation, heterozygosity, and large runs of homozygosity. So it's a very small population, non-random mating. Lots of the genome is identical between the copies from your mum and your dad. So there's this ticking time bomb in the genomes of like the ghosts of bottleneck past that could have real impacts on, say, de-extinct populations. So in New Zealand, there's been a lot of interest in de-extinction, whether for the huia on the right, Haast eagle. I always think Haast eagle, you would need Haast eagle insurance. If you were going tramping or hiking, they've been described as a block of concrete dropping on the back of you from an 8-story building to describe how they would take out moa. And the moa. Now, with New Zealand, with moa, with Tasmania and Australia, with the thylacine, with colossal's interest in the Pacific and Hawaii, with the direwolf in America, is all of these geographic locations have indigenous cultures that need to be engaged with. And this is where what colossal is doing becomes really, really murky. So our lab has been sequencing moa genomes to look at their evolution and the genomes of other living and extinct taonga animals, and we've engaged around the motu, around the country, with iwi, which are tribes, with hapu, sub-tribes, with runanga, tribal councils, with trusts, with whānau families. And there is little to no support for de-extinction across the entirety of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there are many reasons for this. A lot of them are what I've talked about, but also for Maori and for the other indigenous cultures that I talked about, whakapapa or genealogy is vitally important. They can trace all their ancestry back to living and extinct plants and animals. And so it's that connection with the environment that means you do not go messing with the DNA. Genetic engineering can be viewed with disgust, especially if you're going to create Frankenmoa. But there are other concerns around Indigenous data sovereignty, Indigenous IP, bioprospecting, biopiracy, trademarking of extinct animals, but also been shut out of conversations around de-extinction and genetic engineering. And so it's a real danger of this actually becoming another instance of colonialism and breaking the what we have, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, which in Article 2 says Maori have rangatiratanga authority over treasures taonga, and plants and animals are that. So Colossal came to us and basically offered us lots and lots of money to pay for all of the sequencing, all of our moa genomes. And we turned them down. We did not want to become their enablers because there was no support. They wanted to use all our moa genomes for de-extinction, and they wanted all of our Indigenous contacts. And so this actually makes a complete mockery of Paul Schofield's comments in the media, who's working for Colossal, where he said there's a lot of jealousy out there in the scientific community that they're not involved in this project. We have ethics, and that's why we turned them down. We didn't want to become enablers. But what Colossal did is they went to Paul Schofield, who has been known to send samples of birds out of New Zealand without proper engagement and publicly releasing taonga treasured nuclear genomes and not keeping them behind a firewall in New Zealand because of all of these Indigenous concerns. They went to Kyle Davis, who's a Ngāi Tahu archaeologist, who is from some of the Runanga or sub-tribes down south of where I am. And we've engaged with those Runanga, and they're against de-extinction. And all of the vast majority of all the Runanga we've actually engaged with across Ngāi Tahu, the biggest tribe in the South Island, are all against de-extinction. And so Colossal then went to the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre at Canterbury University. They talked to Mike Stevens, who's an historian, the head, and he signed on to it. Then they went and talked to Tamari Tau, who is the upoko, or the head of Ngāi Tua Hariri, who's the local Runanga around Christchurch, and signed on to it. And that's where the engagement stopped. There was no engagement with head tribal office. There was no Ngāi Tahu we call Tront. There was no engagement with members of Ngāi Tua Hariri, the local Runanga. There was no engagement with members of the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre who are against it. And they found out when it hit the media. Now, importantly, there was no engagement with all the sub-tribes of Ngāi Tahu all around the vast majority of the South Island. Now, giant moa aren't just restricted to the tribal area of Ngāi Tahu. There are 8 iwi or tribes up the top of the South Island that giant moa occurred in, and we've engaged with those, and they're all against de-extinction. And so if you're going to de-extinct these animals, you really need to have a widespread conversation that's ethical and good faith, that allows Indigenous cultures to have free, prior, and informed consent, and not cherry picking, which is what Colossal has done. And the same has occurred with Colossal's engagement with the Palawa community, the Tasmanian Aboriginal community around thylacine. They were approached. They said this was one of the darkest things they've been asked to do in their history, and they turned them down. And Colossal went and cherry-picked 3 people that don't represent the community to be on their advisory board. And the Palawa community described it as black cladding your project in a veneer of Indigenous support. And I suspect this is what they're doing across the Pacific in North America. So we really need to look at perceptions when you talk to Indigenous cultures, that there will be a lot more support for using this technology to get rid of pests and save species that we've got left, rather than actually bringing back the ghosts of ancestors past. And so this is what I've been saying quite publicly, in that we actually should be using this technology, which doesn't need to be developed on extinct species. It can be developed on living species, but use it to save the taonga species that we've got left. So we've got three of the most endangered species in New Zealand. We've got kakapo, the big mossy green cute cuddly thing. The one in the middle is the Chatham Island black robin. And the purple rainbow soccer ball here is a takahe. And kakapo are very inbred. They suffer from crusty bum, from lung fungus, because they don't have the genic variation in their immune system genes to fight it off. And there's not much genic variation in the black robin or the takahe. So you could use this technology to sequence ancient genomes to reintroduce lost genetic diversity back into these endangered species or make them resistant to diseases. And there'll be issues around trying to get those genes or those genetically engineered lineages to fix in very inbred populations where genetic drift can be really strong or result in the loss of what you're trying to get into the population. So it won't be a silver bullet for conservation. Conservation will always be mainly habitat restoration, predator control, translocations, but it could be an important tool in the toolbox. And it can also be used to get rid of pests, like gene drives. Introduce genes into pest populations to make them sterile. They're usually fast breeding, so you can get those genes going out into the population and control pests. So with de-extinction, Colossal is really selling, I like to call them a used car salesman. They're selling a promise, they're selling a dream. And any chink or threat to that dream, they really, really have to stamp down on. And so it very much comes in from their social media team or their PR companies, which deal with all the journalists, is never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And so this is very much true when the direwolf got announced and then the mowers. This actually became the biggest science coverage event featuring critical commentary from New Zealand scientists in at least the past 5 years, eclipsing COVID. And there were a few of us from New Zealand that were leading the commentary, namely because if you think of all the ancient DNA labs across the rest of the world, people may be justifiably scared because Colossal's a multi-billion-dollar company, has an army of lawyers. The heads of your lab may be friends with people at Colossal, have collaborated with them or are collaborating, or the heads of the lab may actually be in bed with Colossal. And so we ended up writing lots of pieces that got published, public talks, talking on TV and radio, all around the world. And in New Zealand, this ability is actually enshrined in law and the Education Act, as we are allowed to be the critic and conscience of society without being in danger of lawsuits and everything like in America. But Colossal, especially Bean Lame, don't like this pushback. They live in a vacuum of positivity on Twitter. And they very much operate in a very different way to us scientists. When we publish a paper, we put an embargo. It goes out to science journalists or media centre. They seek critical commentary. Colossal use it very much like a business where they get lots of puff pieces written about them, say in Time magazine, for example. So Ben Lamb was putting out these memes like wolves don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. We're the sheep. And you get the impression they thought this was going to be a much bigger good news story than it was. They started pushing back really hard. And Beth Shapiro wheeled out to give video statements and then actually had to admit they hadn't de-extincted anything, a New Scientist. But they started attacking all of their critics. So this is Ben Lamb saying there are sometimes crazy weird conspiracy articles about Colossal make us laugh, but the dumbest headline of all time goes to this author who's doesn't even know mowers couldn't fly. If mowers fly, we really effed up, lol. I wish people did more research. And this was about an article that I wrote where it had a very tongue-in-cheek title. Now, Ben in articles has said they don't run away from critics, they run towards them. They don't want to tear scientists down, they want to inspire them. And I wouldn't call any of this inspiring at all. And I'd be saying they're running towards them with a giant axe or something. But at the same time, there have been, not just against me, but a lot of the other critics, numerous AI-generated hit pieces that have been published. So Colossal has said it's not them or their benefactors. They interestingly haven't said whether this is actually their PR companies. And they're published in very obscure outlets. So the top one is actually saying that I'm more of a media fixture than a critic, and I need to go focus on my mediocre publication record, which is quite laughable. The bottom one saying that I deal in double standards. I use ancient DNA to reconstruct ecosystems, so how dare I criticize Colossal for doing the same thing that I'm doing? And then they start getting personal. So these pieces, they have been created through AI by these content creators, and it's saying that I'm misrepresenting the Maori voice. I'm co-opting it. I'm being colonialist. I'm not uplifting or inspiring Indigenous scientists, and I can refute that given all of the work and engagement we've done across New Zealand, actually working with Indigenous scientists like Phil Wilcox to uplift Indigenous voices and that. So this is where it starts getting personal. And other critics have had similar pieces where they might be challenging their qualifications, and then they go into saying that one of the critics, Vincent Lynch, was a cis white male, tenured academic. He was attacking Colossal. The top scientists were female. Therefore, he was a sexist misogynist. But we can push back against this by talking to journalists and new scientists or Nature. The local paper here in Dunedin likes to call themselves my knight in shining armor. But also you've got the latest investigative piece coming out of the EMBO report, which goes into all this dark PR. And it'd be nice to be able to respond to some of the quotes by Bean Lane, but at the same time, it actually is illustrative of their behavior. So Beth Shapiro, the chief scientist, said that all of the attacks on the critics and these hit pieces are really childish. George Church said no one should be doing ad hominem attacks and people should put their names to stuff. And Ben Lamb obviously didn't get the memo, because in this he basically said that we were angry, that we were tinfoil hacked conspiracy theorists, that we had mental health problems, and that we were engaging in stalking-like behavior, which is not really becoming of a CEO at all. But at the same time, he said, we don't care what you call these de-extinct creatures, you're going to create more controversy and his numbers are going to go up. So he doesn't care about conservation or any of this. It's just about making money. And so there is pushback against these investigative pieces. Ben Lamb on Twitter has said he wished he could develop a large language model to answer the same dumb 10 questions he gets from nerds that hate us. And then he's very much thanks Elon Musk for making Twitter fun again. And so he's got this meme here where he's saying all the light you can see is the positivity that they're getting from Twitter and they're like the entertainment industry, like the non-critical journalism. But what's the shadowy place over? That's blue sky, where all the scientists moved after Twitter started going downhill. And even respected science journalists, this is Laurie Winklis, an Irish journalist who's based in Wellington and writes for Forbes magazine. She got contacted by a PR company working for Colossal that had an AI-generated piece that saying that the science sector was carrying out coordinated attacks, and could Laurie publish this under her own name in Forbes to start pushing back on all of our criticism. So we shouldn't be attacked. No one speaking out in their critic and conscience role should be attacked. But at the same time, if you have to think of a positive aspect, is we at least know our message is hitting home. If they had anything to come back at us against, they would, and they're not. They're resorting to these very low blow and smear campaigns. So, as I said at the very beginning, to finish up, is we really need to start shifting this perception from one of de-extinction to one of genetic engineering. And people's perceptions are going to differ. If you're going to say you're going to de-extinct a moa versus you're going to genetically mess up an emu. And so I'm involved in a study where we're going to survey lots of different cohorts around New Zealand and around the world to get your perceptions, get baseline data around your thoughts on de-extinction, your thoughts on genetic engineering, and then track this longitudinally with different forms of science communication, whether that's documentaries, blogs like On the Conversation, TV interviews, radio interviews, or even satirical comics like these, to see how your perceptions change and how can we actually communicate with people. Because I think the ability of scientists to get funding to develop these tools from the public sector, I think is a failure of the public sector to not see the ability of these tools to actually help with conservation for saving species we've got left. But also, we need to be able to communicate with different cohorts of society. So Andy Pasca's on record at a conference in Australia saying where he got called out on the lack of Indigenous engagement and the blackclading that occurred with the thylacine, is he said they have hard enough trouble telling educated scientists what they do, let alone members of the general public and Indigenous communities, which kind of speaks to the way they're actually spreading this misinformation during the science communication. So one way of doing SciComm could be these tongue-in-cheek comics. This is Peter Jackson talks to Colossal that he wants a moa de-extincted. They de-extinct a moa. This is one of my favorite. Unintended consequence, it has teeth. It eats Peter Jackson and the Colossal scientist. The moa get released, they escape, and a whole series of tragedies occurs, and they go extinct again. And it could be through what the Otago Daily Times, our local paper, is they teach Te Reo Māori, the Maori language, to readers, and they're talking about you're more likely to get the moa back from your neighbour than to bring back moa. And so, yeah, I'd just like to thank you guys for letting me talk. I'm very much a believer in that we should use this technology once there's been proper engagement to save the species got left, but we do not need to use it to bring back extinct creatures to assuage human guilt for causing their extinction. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that, Nick. That was a really, really great talk. So we've already got a few questions in the chat here. First from Robert says, do professional bodies have ethical guidelines that apply to Colossal's activities?
Yeah, there are. Colossal say they're meeting all the ethical guidelines for creating genetically engineered animals, and we shouldn't be concerned. But I think they're also glossing over a lot of things like the example I gave was trying to bring, say, de-extinct moa back into New Zealand. It's not going to be as simple as they seem to think it is just bring animals back. And you've got all of the biosecurity concerns. And what I find quite interesting is genetic engineering is currently illegal in New Zealand. There are discussions with government about lifting the ban on GE, and there are good reasons for that. There are good reasons also against. But I find it very intriguing that moa bones are being sent overseas to create genetically engineered emus to be reintroduced back to New Zealand when it's actually legal in New Zealand. It just sounds like getting around the rules.
That's actually really interesting. Is that the follow-up question from Robert was, who controls access to moa DNA?
So Maori have intellectual property rights over all New Zealand flora and fauna. Now, this isn't to say that it's a yes-no situation. It could be you just sit down over a pint, a cup of tea, have a talk, have a conversation about what you want to do. This is around trying to stop biopiracy, bioprospecting. If we think of Manuka honey, for example, or medicinal purposes, or drug companies making money off of New Zealand things and none of the money flowing back to Indigenous cultures. So in an ideal world, Maori would be kaitiaki guardians over the moa genomes, and what Colossal has actually said is any of the moa genomes that get produced, and part of their research, the kaitiaki will be the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre. But I, at the moment, don't believe for a minute that us or other researchers in New Zealand would be able to go and get access to those genomes for bona fide research. I think there's going to be too much money, too much IP, all invested in Colossal for that to happen. And so this is, to me, one of the real dangers of Colossal going into this space, whether it's for de-extincting creatures or for conservation, is we're effectively privatizing all of this research into the hands of a company with a thin-skinned CEO who, in conservation talk, may not actually have the best interests of animals at heart. It's a lot different to us sequencing moa genomes here, where we put them on the Genomics Aotearoa server. They're held in New Zealand. We talk to the tribal subtribes about having a kaitiaki or guardian, and then people can have access to that with engagement for bona fide non-commercial research. It gets too murky with commercial companies.
Fair enough. So Richard's asking, do you see a corollary between computational linguists who have said that AI sucks all of the air out of the room by dominating conversation, and the extinction in current biogenomic work?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly.
So I think he's asking, so do you see like a similarity between sort of AI or the AI dominant conversationalists are really
Yeah.
focusing the computational question, conversations around AI,
Yeah.
and companies like Colossal who are focusing the conversations from the biogenomic conservation side into really this extinction and de-extinction space.
Yeah, I do see a lot of similarities. I think it's a shame in how it's been communicated. It's probably a good lesson on both sides and how they're communicating to get the funding they want. It's to their benefactors, conservation is not cool. Going to talk to Peter Jackson about what's your pet extinct creature that you want to bring back is always going to get more funding. But I also think it's a failure on our part to be able to communicate as well the importance of developing these tools. Like if you talk to Andy Pass, he says he's been trying for decades to get funding to develop all these conservation tools. He could never get it. So he's signed up with Colossal and has more money and made more progress than he's ever done. So I think going down the route of all of this de-extinction is actually undermining conservation, especially because of all the misconceptions out there. It's like Doug Burnham, who was it the Minister of the Interior in the US when the direwolf de-extinction got announced, said, well, actually, we can now do away with the endangered species list. We can take species off of it. In New Zealand, where we have a right-wing government which is very much focused on resource extraction and fast-tracking projects that got justifiably rejected due to environmental concerns, has basically said if there's a skink or blind Freddy the Frog standing in the way of progress, it's goodbye Freddy. Now, there's already rumblings that they're saying, well, we could actually bring Freddy back from extinction, so let's plow on ahead. I think that's why we need all of this critical commentary and all the science communication to basically myth bust it. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think it has. A very similar question from Juliana actually is do you think the mentality behind companies such as Colossal is similar to the discourse that we've heard before, that somehow technology is going to save humanity even to the detriment of our current conservation efforts and issues?
I think so. Some of the media we're seeing coming out of Colossal, like those AI generated pieces they wanted Laurie Winkless to produce, as they were saying they're the savior of mankind. We're the savior of the world. It's all the communication coming out of Colossal is very hyperbolic, blown out of proportion. What they're doing is the greatest thing since sliced bread with the de-extinction of the direwolf. So I think we're in real danger there. Why we need to cut through that message.
We've got a tricky question from Philip here. What would change your mind about de-extinction?
Tricky one. To me, it would be if you could bring, let's take the moa. If you could bring back an actual moa, bring back all its gut microflora in large enough genetically diverse numbers and release them to actually have a real beneficial ecological impact, then yes, because then you would decrease all the opportunity cost. You would be able to have self-sustaining populations. But at the same time, it's a fantasy. I'm never going to get that.
Yeah, fair enough. Sounds like there's a lot of buts to that question, but
Yeah,
it's
and
a
that's
tricky question.
That's what colossal petals in. Like Andy Pasca said that if thylacine was still around, then you wouldn't have the devil facial tumor disease ripping through the Tasmanian devil population because they would eat all the sick Tasmanian devils. And I'm going, well, it's a very simplistic view of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So Heather asks, how are they, I'm guessing they meaning Colossal, going to really make money out of this?
Um, all the technology they're developing doesn't necessarily just have implications for conservation. It will have implications within lots of different sectors, say for medical, with artificial wombs, for example, or being able to, if we think way down the line, if the society ever got to genetically engineering humans to get rid of disease. So they will be thinking, develop all these technologies, siphon off the ones for medical use or into other um, sectors, make money off of that.
Absolutely. Annalise is asking, would it be an authentic mower?
No. So the moa is a product of 58 odd million years of evolution in a very geologically, climatically dynamic environment. What they will be producing is a poor genetically engineered facsimile of a moa that actually bears more whakapapa or genealogical relationship to an emu or a tinamou. It would be a poor ecological surrogate at best.
No, fair enough. And similar question from Annalise is, again, what is your opinion on the de-extinct or de-extinction of the mammoth?
Look, it'd be cool to see a mammoth, but I think if you're truly going to have a conservation or ecological impact of mammoths, you're going to need thousands and thousands of mammoths to bring back, form herds, matriarchy, society, everything, to actually have a beneficial impact. And you think of all the good you could actually do siphoning all of that money into the conservation of the Asian elephant, or all the money Colossal is going to spend trying to de-extinct the moa. If you put that into actually conserving New Zealand's endangered bird species, their budget is bigger than the Department of Conservation in New Zealand's budget.
What about the recently extinct bird like the huia? Would that be a better alternative?
Um, it could be, and there's one of the arguments that that's what Colossal is using for the thylacine, that it went extinct so recently. The problem with the huia is we know so little about it, and just because it's only went extinct recently, doesn't mean we know a lot about it. And so we could be bringing back an animal and release it into the wild and not exactly know what all of its habitat preferences are, or its full diet, or its behavior. And so one of the species we're working on here is the extinct bush wren, which went extinct only in the 1970s. But if you actually look up, say, Hanzab, what we call the bird Bible, um, there's quotes all through that as poorly known, very little known, virtually nothing known, and it's just basic ecology we do not know. And so I think this is the danger, that if you're going to bring back species, extinct species, that you really need to know all of the pages of its biological heritage and its natural history to be able to successfully bring them back and let them have self-sustaining populations. It's like, as Colossal keeps saying, everything is innate. You don't need parents; they'll just know how to do it. But they've already said with the direwolf, while they're clumsy at hunting, we might need to bring in another alpha wolf to teach them how to hunt.
Fair enough. I think I might hand over to Claire now. I believe Claire's got one or two questions for you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
just curious about, instead of de-extinction, what would be the best target in New Zealand, Aotearoa, for genetic rescue?
Good couple of targets. I would say hoi ho, the yellow-eyed penguin, to reintroduce some of its lost genetic diversity back into that population. Also, actually make it resistant, if possible, to some of the diseases that are afflicting it with increased climate change. Colossal, for example, has genetically engineered Australian marsupials with a single base pair change to be resistant to cane toad toxin, but they can't get those genomes in the cells to start developing into embryos. Other candidates in New Zealand would be kakapo would be a good one. It's like crusty bum and lung fungus are caused by pathogens that are just prevalent in the environment. But because there's not much genetic variation in kakapo, they don't have the ability to fight them off. So being able to make them resistant to those diseases, to give them increased adaptive potential in a fast changing world would be good candidates, but we need to have that wide conversation.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Just thinking about something and going back to the huia, a colleague had talked to Ngāti Huia about bringing back the huia, and one of their elders from, I guess, the iwi that was their namesake, said that there may not be the same habitat that there was ages ago, and so we were returning
Yep.
to what? Where would they go? How would they live
Yeah.
their life even if they were brought back? So.
Where are you going to put them? And this is one of the conundrums we've got is a lot of the habitats that the birds are living in now are completely relictual habitats that are suboptimal and not good. They're living there just because it's the only spot they've got to go.
Indeed, indeed. Um, well, Karatiana, would you like to close us off with the Karakia if there are no other questions?
Yep, sure. So yeah, thank you, Nick, for that. Being a member of the Ngaitaru tribe and hearing about my cousins is a little bit strange, but and I just wanted to point out to the international people who probably don't know, as Maori, we view the moa as one of our older siblings. So of course we don't want to bring back our dead relations. So this is so. The closing karakia just again reinforces this. So e te mō te wao nui o tāne, haere atu rā. Kua rere koe ki te poa, kua tau o koutou mauri ki te whenua, e oho ana ngā roimata o te ngākau mō te koutou ngaro. Haumie, huie, taiki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our attendees for joining. You can support our work by joining GFANS. I've posted something in the chat. And feel free to either get in contact with us or find Nick's email online. And thank you so much for your support.